You want any special kind of, you like, do you want me to write something offensive or?
Just go for it.
Just go for it?
Just
Okay.
go for it. I'm kind of with you.
I'm so glad you came.
I am too. We are.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Matt.
Congratulations.
Yeah, Ryan will be back to the end, but I think he's having something talking about going. Yeah. Yeah, right.
Back in Norway, Karina finally had surgery for what turned out to be a benign tumor. Once fully recovered, she called Jeb and May to take him up on his offer of introducing her to jumping. He picked her up at LAX and drove her to his place out back beyond the patio and pool of the big house in Malibu. There, Karina confessed that she had actually only made 23 skydives, not the 223 as Jeb had been led to believe. Jeb took a look at her skydiving jump log and was like, what the? Annoyed. He fixed her with a look and said, I don't know if I'm able to take you base jumping. With 23 skydives, I'm not sending you on a suicide mission. Then he had an idea. To evaluate her readiness, Jeb took Karina to the Paris Valley Skydiving Center for a series of skydives. Her athletic background was an asset. He could see that much. In free fall, Karina demonstrated aerial awareness and tracking ability. She handled her canopy in flight and nailed the landings. Satisfied, Jeb booked them tickets to Twin Falls, Idaho to begin training at the Pine Bridge. That first night in Twin Falls, Karina came down with food poisoning and curled up on the bathroom floor of their hotel room. It was humiliating, but Jeb was nice about it. While her strength returned, she learned to pack a parachute. Once well enough, she visited the bridge to observe other jumpers scaling the railing 800 feet above a green river, the Snake River, the one Evel Knievel planned to launch over in his SkyCycle X2 before that stunt turned into a debacle. Passing motorists roared by, honking and shouting encouragement, issuing thumbs up out open windows. After 2 days of rest, Karina was well enough to try. She wore a wetsuit, which left her feeling uncomfortable, not exactly ladylike. She carried a round parachute on her back. Landing in the river, she would be scooped out by a waiting rescue boat. Car horns blared, this time for her as she made her way along the bridge. Jeb followed with a video camera, firing questions to gauge Karina's readiness. Probing for some sign of nerves, he was shocked to observe that Karina appeared the very picture of cool confidence. He did not know that as she scaled the railing and stepped onto a lumber plank set up as a launch platform, clutching a pilot chute in her right hand, thoughts swirled like the river's currents. Hold tight. This is unnatural. You shouldn't do this. You don't want to fall from this bridge. Jeb coached her from the other side of the railing, barking commands. The particulars would be difficult to recall, but she remembered the basics. 3, 2, 1, see ya. Pushing off with both feet, Karina delayed 2 seconds before pitching, her round parachute opening with a whoosh. Pulled into the rescue boat, dripping wet, she wondered if that was it. Is this base jumping? It had been a blur. Was she changed somehow? For 4 days, Karina would launch from the bridge, her awareness and impressions expanding and intensifying each time. By accretion, internal voids of which she had only been dimly aware began to be occupied, and she understood at last what was meant by fulfillment. Her training at the Prime ended suddenly when, on a two-way jump with Jeb, he broke an ankle while landing downwind along the riverbank. On crutches, Jeb continued to coach, taking Karina to a dam in the Sierra Nevada. Because she could not get around easily, it was up to her to walk the landing area alone beforehand and get acquainted with the terrain. She couldn't do it. She was frightened, not of the jump, but of the dark. Reaching the landing zone would require walking through a wood at night. This brave girl was petrified of the dark. So they drove to Auburn, where Jeb delivered instructions from a walkie-talkie as Karina made her way alone onto the Forest Hill Bridge in the dark and dropped into the canyon. He had something about him that made me feel very confident about his skills, and he was also very honest and very direct, maybe to the point of morbid in the way he spoke about base jumping, Karina would remember. From the point I came to the U.S. and started learning, he was very direct about the fact that I could get injured and could get hurt through base jumping. I would see other people die, most likely some of my very good friends, and potentially, very likely, I would die doing it myself if I kept on doing it. He was always talking about death and people dying and accidents and stuff that I never really talked about. The way he put it out there, it forced me into making a decision about whether this was something I wanted to do or not. If I wanted to do it, I had to do it 100%. At times, a fed-up Karina would say, "You're always so negative about it. You're always putting an emphasis on worst case, and it's not always like that." "I'm not negative," Jeb would reply, voice rising an octave. "You're walking through a minefield, and I'm going to tell you there's a minefield out there. If you need to get to the other side of the minefield for whatever reason, you need to get to the other side. Fine, I'll help you. But even with all my help and doing everything right, you can step on a mine, and there's nothing I can do for you if that happens." That summer, circumstance would offer an object lesson for what Jeb was trying to convey. His ankle healed, he returned to Leisbotten and jumped Norway's big walls at Gerard with Karina. When they parted the first week of August, Jeb headed to Switzerland and the Lauterbrunnen Valley. The valley had fast gained a reputation in the jumping community for the big walls and permissive attitude of the locals, who decades earlier had grown accustomed to extreme sportsmen, climbers, skiers, and paragliders lured to their town. An added appeal for jumpers came in the convenience of cable cars and trams rising from the valley floor to Mürren, Wengen, and Winteregg, all of which offered jumpers short hikes to the exit. That summer, Karen Seika was there with some of the crew from Portland, Weston, and Dr. Death, Nick Hartshorn. For a week, Jeb and Weston had a friendly one-upsmanship going, Seiko says, but Weston always seemed willing to go further. When Jeb balked at jumping in the rain one day and began walking back to the cable car, Weston raised him on the walkie-talkie. He told him everything would be fine and called him out for a lack of courage. "Dude," Jeb barked into the radio, "you're better than me. I know that. Go ahead, call me a pussy." Weston argued that eventually Jeb would have to jump in marginal conditions, so he might as well learn. But Jeb spotted the flaw in such reasoning. Continuing back to the cable car for a return trip to Lauterbrunnen, he understood that you never had to jump in marginal conditions. You never had to jump, period. Days later, though, Jeb would be called to account for his own reckless conduct. Flying his wingsuit, he had pulled low over the pasture, practically going in before his parachute popped open. Dr. Nick brought the episode up one night over dinner with Seiko and West and some other jumpers. "Jeb, we like what you do," he said, "but you've got to be more careful because we'd like to keep you around a little longer." "I get it," Jeb said. "I know." Dr. Nick had been thinking a lot about the future. He'd been saving up to marry his girlfriend and was debating whether to buy a new Jaguar or pay off his student loans first. "Bro," Jeb said, "why wait? Pay the student loans later. You never know how long you're going to live." He had a good point. "I have to be responsible," Dr. Higgins. "Buy the Jaguar," Jeb insisted. Everyone agreed that buying the Jaguar would not be a wrong decision. As dinner broke up, Dr. Nick had not yet made up his mind. Everyone agreed to get up early the next morning and jump the High Nose, a promontory just beyond Staubach Falls. It is almost 2,000 feet above the valley, but a nasty ledge looms about a 7-second rock drop, or 640 feet below the exit. The next morning, August 6th, Jeb overslept. Making his way down to the street, he figured he could wait for the second load and join the others on the cable car. Through a light rain, he spotted Seiko and Weston approaching up the street. "So are we going to do a jump?" he called out. They didn't reply until they were near us, their faces uncharacteristically somber. "Nah," Weston said finally. Nick died. His canopy had opened 180 degrees off heading, sending Dr. Nicholas Hartshorn sailing straight for the cliff. He had managed to land on a ledge, but forward motion arrested, his parachute deflated, and he fell backwards, striking the cliff several times as he tumbled to the valley floor. He was 38. Two months later, reunited at Bridge Day in October, Jeb and Karina stood in the shade along smooth river stones 900 feet beneath the graceful steel arch when a cable TV reporter approached and made a proposition. She was compiling a program on illegal sports that would include street fighting, drag racing, and if they were willing, base jumping from a building. Her producer would pay, she said, if Jeb and Karina would jump for their cameras. Jeb said he knew just the place. A few weeks later, he and Karina were in Manhattan, waiting out the weather, passing time in Central Park and sitting through movies and Broadway shows, basically behaving like a couple, although they weren't, despite Jeb's growing feelings for her. One night, once the skies finally cleared and the wind died down, sometime after midnight, Jeb crouched on a thin ledge 50 vertiginous stories above Madison Avenue. He had disabled the locking mechanism on the window of his room at the New York Palace Hotel with needle-nose pliers, just as he had done years earlier with Eero. Opening the window as wide as possible allowed him to maneuver his long body through the narrow opening and invited the city's familiar music inside. Car horns, the percussion of speeding tires on potholes, whinnying brakes, and a distant rumble from a truck's diesel engine. Earlier in the evening, staff in the opera lobby had stared as a crew hauled video equipment to the elevators to the room where the bald guy and the blonde were staying. They were unaware of what was about to occur from the upper floors. Like, were they making a porno in there or what? Accomplices waited in the streets, and Giggy fretted in her room several floors below. A conspiracy requiring weeks of planning and the right weather conditions had entered its final phase. Jeb was dressed all in black, from his helmet to a rig on his back containing a single parachute. From the ledge, it was a 6-second plunge to a fatal impact some 170 yards directly below. And although he had jumped from the hotel once before, that act had stretched his skills and composure to their limits. Remember, you don't have to do it, he called to Karina, who was seated on the bed. I know, she said. The small window of the hotel required backing out first. Clinging to the frame by fingertips, Jeb performed contortions that only years of yoga practice could have prepared him for. As he faced forward at last, side 12 boots balanced on a thin sill, the building's slippery skin descended hundreds of feet toward the suggestion of a rooftop. Fuck, he said, sighing. Fucking sketchy exit point, dude. After a deep breath, he added, all right. Clearing his mind the way he had trained, he banished any thoughts of tremors bobbing his legs like sewing machine needles, the dryness in his mouth, perspiration on his hands, his heart's hard thumping rhythm, and an acid panic rising like an elevator in his throat. In a city of millions, friends and family nearby, he stood alone on the ledge, utterly focused. 5 seconds, he said, which Karina repeated into a handheld radio to the rest of the team. Exhaling, Jeb called, "See you guys," and jumped, commencing a precise choreography. 1. Flinging his body backward, he executed a flawless gainer, fear draining as his mind tightened to the task at hand. 2. Air rushed ever louder through his helmet as he plunged into the night. Reaching behind his right hip for his pilot chute, he grabbed it and flung it into the air. 3. Caught by the air, the small chute inflated, tugging on a bridle connected to his parachute container, held fast by a single pin. Tension on the bridle pulled hard on the container, releasing the pin. As he fell faster, objects below gained size and detail in the first stage of a powerful sensation known as ground rush. 4. The main canopy, folded and packed tight in the container, spilled out, catching the air and inflating with a resounding crack that startled Giggy in her room. She and Fitzmaurice had just happened to be in New York that week on business, and Giggy had maintained a late-night vigil, white-knuckle gripping a two-way radio, eyes gazing at the silhouette of St. Patrick's. She had switched the radio chatter off earlier to provide quiet as Fitzmaurice slept nearby in preparation for a meeting in the morning. So she was startled by the sudden appearance of a black parachute bursting open before her eyes, causing her window to shudder as if buffeted by a strong wind. Legs buckling, Giggy dropped to her knees, overcome by a feeling she would describe as breathtaking, like an out-of-body out-of-body experience. Outside, under an open parachute, Jeb descended slower, hovering feet first 30 stories above an orderly grid of flood-lit streets. Reaching above his head for toggles, he tugged hard left, sweeping 90 degrees in that direction. Lined up over Madison Avenue, desolate in the early hours except for a few cars and trucks inching along like insects, he traveled 3 city blocks. The lonely pavement rose to meet him until finally his boots skidded to a landing in a bus lane beside orange construction barricades, parachute deflating nearby like a sigh. Without the sound of air whooshing in his ears, the city's soundtrack returned at heightened volume, a rhythm of clunking metal from a delivery truck, whinnying brakes and horn echoes. He quickly gathered his parachute as a cluster of cars approached up Madison. A yellow cab edged toward him, stopping with a weary shriek. "Are you okay?" the cabbie called in a foreign accent through an open window. "How's it going, man?" Jeb inquired, as if greeting an old friend. "Where you came from?" "The sky," he said with a trilling laugh, hustling away, hugging his parachute down a darkened East 48th Street, where he hailed a different cab and disappeared into the night. Thank you. So I guess I'll open it up to questions now. If anybody has a question, I guess raise your hand and I'll call on you and do my best.
Have you ever done any diving at all? I mean, not this diving, any kind of jumping?
I've been skydiving twice.
You have been?
Yes. And,
Did you tell your parents?
That was off our.
Afterwards, did they say it was okay?
Yeah, just twice. The first time I got off to a really inauspicious start. I had plans to. I went down to Florida for my first skydive, and my plan was to become certified to get my rating. And so what you do is you take part in this accelerated free fall course, and you do a bunch of classroom training, several hours of classroom training, then you jump out of a plane with 2 instructors who are there to kind of guide you. And that went okay, that more or less due to the training. But then when you pull your parachute, you're on your own. And that went okay too for a while. But then eventually you have to land. And that was the tricky part. I came in either flared too early or flared too late. I don't know what I did wrong, but I did something wrong. And I was exhilarated and just feeling on top of the world. I thought I was walking on the moon, and I was going to make a real graceful landing. And I put out my left foot, and as soon as my left foot hit, I just heard like a snap, crack, went right down on my knees. And, I didn't feel anything because I guess the adrenaline was pumping, but it wasn't wasn't gruesome. It was just a bad sprain, but it prevented me from continuing my training. And since then, I've only skydived one other time, and that was a tandem skydive, which was just you're strapped to somebody, and it's just all right, time. So that's it.
Did someone push you out of the plane? They'd have to do it to me.
Well, the first time I did hesitate for a second. You're supposed to, and anybody who's skydived would be able to attest to this. But you're supposed to. The way they train you is you're in the doorway and you're supposed to go up and then down under and then back up again. And at some point I hesitated, and so my instructors went, and I went like a half second later. So it's like I was kind of cartwheeling through the air, and I could see the plane, going away from me. and then I came around again, and there's the plane, so it's just a little bit farther away. But eventually I stabilized. So, in a manner of speaking, I guess I did have to be dragged out of the plane.
Who did you go to, is this your first book, you had published?
This is actually this is the first book that was mine from conception. But
Right.
I did publish a book that was is a reference book. It was like a work for hire type of.
Because, Bob had a lot of experience when he did his, book, Buffalo Bills, that, trying to get the financial backing, back the book. But, locally, he had people working, the artists, the graphic artists that laid out the pictures, and, it's such a big project. I wondered who you went to. Did you go locally, or did you go to New York?
I had my book is published by Penguin Press, which is part of the Penguin Group, Penguin Random House now, which is a big outfit. I think they're the largest publishing outfit in the world, or at least. But it started for me from a newspaper story that I had written for the New York Times about this same subject, this idea of these guys. They wanted, as I described, sort of leading into the reading. I was captivated by the story, and after the story had been published in the paper, I just stuck with it and wrote a book proposal, which is kind of the I got an agent. That's sort of the first thing you have to do, and then they tell you how to write a book proposal, which is kind of tricky in its own way, and then they put it out to the publishers, and hopefully somebody likes it. And I was fortunate enough that Penguin, an editor at Penguin, liked it, and they bought the book, and then it was just something to write. I did get a lot of help. I don't want to imply that I didn't. I did get a lot of help, but it's a lonely exercise writing a book. They're responsible for the physical book and the words.
How big is the subculture, would you estimate, of the people that are doing this? Specifically the wingsuits, and I guess maybe based on what you do before some wingsuits.
There aren't that. It's difficult to get a handle on it. Even the people who make the suits would like to know that. There are probably, there's no register or rolls or anything to confirm the number. I suspect that the wingsuit base jumpers at the elite level, maybe 200, maybe more. I suspect there are more people getting involved all the time, but at the time when and it's been more than a year since I was involved with these guys regularly as part of my research, and then maybe 120, maybe 200.
Are they always kind of in the same general areas, or are they spread out?
They're spread out, but they tend to convene at the same areas. There aren't many places you can do this for. You need the altitude, the right contours of the cliffs, and there are places where most places in the U.S. you're not permitted to do this. You can't do this in national parks, for example, like El Capitan. You're not supposed to do it. Of course, people do it anyway, but they're subject to arrest and heavy fines. And there's been a game of cat and mouse out there in the Yosemite Valley for going on 40 years. So most of these guys they go to Girard, which is a place, a fjord, on a fjord in Norway. Every summer, the weather's good enough in the summertime to go to Norway, and they're permitted to hike up and then jump off the cliffs there. The Lauterbrunnen Valley in Switzerland, which is one of the places that was where Dr. Nick Hartshorn died. Every summer, the international base jumping community is there because the cliffs, these 2,000-foot cliffs bracket the valley. It's just an incredible, it's an incredibly beautiful place just to visit, but it's an easy place to go and base jump. They are welcome to base jumpers, and they can take cable cars right up to they don't even have to hike. They take a cable car up, jump off, and get on the cable car and do it again. So that's one of the really popular places to go. There are other places in France. This whole culture, though, is very secretive and always has been throughout its history, because oftentimes it does require some trespassing or quasi-illegal behavior. So they don't usually advertise, except for these few places that I've just mentioned. Ladies first.
I wanted to know if that story was on a reality show. That Manhattan jump.
No, it wasn't on a reality show, but there is video of it, which I've seen. It was part of a compilation that Jeff Corliss, one of the ways he makes money is by selling footage of his stunts, and he's put that out to the public. I don't know if maybe you've seen it. It's possible. I mean, but if you're talking about maybe a TV deal, maybe we could talk about
I was going to ask you, what was one of the more harrowing experiences you went through writing the book, or maybe perhaps that you witnessed right on the book?
That's an easy question to answer. In January of 2012, I was in Cape Town and with Jeff Corliss, who was there training in anticipation of eventually landing a wingsuit. But he was also there. The crew from HBO's Real Sports had come down, and they were filming him, and he was flying from Table Mountain, which is it can be a great place to jump from. It's easy to get to. There's a cable car that goes right up to the top. The winds are often too strong to do a jump, but he had been jumping there, and he was kind of zooming in at a ledge that week, during the course of that week, and getting more and more comfortable with the terrain. The producers and the reporter then left and went back to the United States, and it was like just a matter of getting one more shot and a sequence. And he wanted it to look good. Like he wanted it to be, sort of like the showstopper type sequence. And so he had a friend buy 2 party balloons and walk up to the ledge with some accomplices, and they set up a camera there, and the idea that the balloon would be a target. These 2 balloons would be a target on the ledge, and he could fly, right at the balloon, and the string is like 6 feet long, so he'd be flying really close to the rock. And I was at the exit point. I was up on top of the mountain with the base jumpers. There were 3 of them jumping that day. The first guy went off, and he flew right next to the balloon, and it was perfect and incredible. But nobody had noticed that the vortices coming off of his wingsuit had pulled the balloon down, and the string had kind of snagged on a rock. So instead of being 6 feet off the deck, it was maybe 3 feet.
Oh.
So the next 2 to come was Jeb and his cameraman, Jeff Nemelkoff, who had 6 cameras mounted on his head, and he would fly with these cameras. He was an amazing guy. Sadly, he died in May, this past May. He also had his still camera, not unlike this one right here, and he activated the shutter by biting down on a bit in his teeth while he was flying. It was amazing. So he was, but a digression. But they jumped, and Jeb homed in on that balloon, and he hit the ledge, and it took a couple seconds for the sound to reach us up on the mountain, but we could see that something wasn't right. I couldn't actually see him tumbling through the air, but eventually I saw him just beyond the ledge going left, and I knew the ledge is only about 80 feet high, so 80 feet is really too low for a parachute to work properly. He was above the ledge, so maybe he had 120 feet or so to work. And then he disappeared out of view. And I was stunned. You know, that wasn't what was supposed to happen. So, you know, we assumed that he was dead. We all thought he was dead. And it's very strange. My kind of like journalistic instincts kicked in on the cable car on the ride. I was composing his obituary with my head. I was gonna call up editors in New York. And this great adventurer is dead. As it turned out, he wasn't dead. Incredibly, he had pulled his parachute. It was less than a 2-second canopy ride, and his lines were all twisted. And in an area that is just utterly rocky, he managed to land on the only vegetation around. So it's like, and I described it this way in the book, he fell out of a barn loft and landed in a haystack. But he was pretty badly beaten up. I mean, he was bleeding and losing consciousness, and there's no guarantee that he would make it. We thought, he's probably going to die. But as it happened, he did, and it's just very telling about his personality, but also, I guess anybody would be euphoric after they survive something they think they're going to die. Yeah. But, I walked into the ER, and it was maybe only like an hour and a half after he had been rescued, and by helicopter. It was very dramatic. And he just looked at me and was like, put a scare into all of us. His face just lit up. He was just so happy. Like it was like he had just it was like he was like a kid on Christmas. He just not shaken up or anything. And I just thought, he's a special person, and it takes a special person to go through something like that, come out the other side smiling. Yeah. But it wasn't fun for me. I didn't feel like smiling.
How fast is he going when he's hitting the person's flying? How fast is he?
I've heard ranges that they can, some of these guys can get up to 160 miles per hour in a dive, maybe even faster. I mean, these guys, they didn't have, when they're base jumping, they don't have a lot, because they're jumping from lower altitude, they might not be reaching those speeds. Plus they're trying to fly precisely near terrain, so they be around 100 miles an hour. I should know this. I have to look it up. I can't remember how fast he was going exactly when he hit the ledge, but I think it was close to 100 miles an hour. And he hit at his leg level, and he just
Can you give us a little bit of history of how the wingsuits came about and, the technology that made it possible? I mean, is that something that's been around for a long time, or is it real recent?
Well, wingsuits have been around, I guess, like, for centuries. If you, even Leonardo da Vinci had created a design for a wingsuit. A lot of that early history, it's hard to separate fact from fiction, but people were jumping off of objects with these primitive parachutes long before the Wright brothers ever came along. That was before there was aviation. They would jump off of a tower or a cliff or a days of aviation, though, there were wingsuit flyers at these. There was a culture of like air circuses, stunt flying, and these barnstorming men, these and some women too. Heroes they'd go to these towns and they would they'd put on an air show, and people would come out. I mean, this was new technology. And these were rural people, and some of these guys. This is how they earn their living. You draw the biggest crowd, you earn the most money. So you have to do the most daring thing. One of the guys, one of these early barnstormers, by the name of a guy by the name of Clem Sohn, was he used to engage in these low pull contests. This was like this was like the best. This was like the pinnacle. These guys would jump out of a plane together, and then it was like a game of chicken. Like whoever pulled last was the winner, and that was always, that was a great crowd pleaser. And sometimes the reward for being the winner was death. But he got this idea to build a wingsuit, and he built one out of canvas and wood, and it was primitive by modern standards, but it did give him glide. And what they would do in those days, because you're oftentimes 1,000 feet up or more, they would attach bags of flour to their legs, and the flour would create a trail in the sky so that you could see them from the ground. That's big. One of the reasons these sports are taking off now is that now these guys can fly close to the ground, but also they're all wearing cameras now because the technology is so small. Back then, they were just a little speck up in the sky. But he inspired a lot of other people to do this because, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And he was a bit of a star. He was in Time magazine, and I think he was sponsored by Chevron. He had the Chevron label on his wings. He wound up dying rather famously in Paris when his parachute lines got fouled on his wingsuit, and I think the report said there were 120,000 people who witnessed it live there, and that gives you an indication of how big of a star he was. But though the World War II kind of changed aviation, the aviation culture. It wasn't so much about being a daredevil after that. They got, the military culture kind of imposed training and standards, and then after the war, these wingsuits were considered kind of like it was too much of like hell for leather type of approach for recreational skydiving. They were trying to get broader respectability, and they didn't want people dying. That's bad for business. So it went underground. Wingsuit flying went underground, and in fact, most drop zones didn't permit people to use wingsuits. It wasn't until the mid '90s that a French guy created the modern wingsuit, the Ram Air wingsuit, which is based on the same principles that modern parachutes use. And basically, you're using a type of like ripstop nylon, they're like high tensile nylon, and when they jump, there are vents on the underside of the suit, and those vents fill with air. The air rams in there, and it creates an airfoil, a wing, and that's what allows them to glide. And so I guess there are kind of two like distinct eras of wingsuit flying, or sort of thing.
Gentleman that crashed, does he still jump?
Yes. I don't think he'll ever stop him. But yeah, he's had a lot of problems, and particularly with his knee, resulting from that crash. I just heard today, in fact, that next spring he is planning to fly over the Great Wall of China. So he's still doing big stunts, and he's not as active, as I say, he's not as active as he used to be because he just keeps aggravating these injuries. But he's still out there, still one of the top guys, and I doubt if he'll ever stop.
you happen to know, like, the age of the oldest guy or woman who does this?
Well, there's a guy who makes suits named Tony Irigallo. He's this British guy who lives in Florida and manufactures his suits in Florida, and he's in his 60s, so he's a young man like you are.
This is no longer premature.
But I don't know the oldest. Like if there's a record for. I know there are skydivers who are active into their. He's doing tandem skydives, but George H.W. Bush is still, every birthday he does another skydive. So. Yeah.
Oh, yeah? He's just along for the ride.
Yes, that's true.
He has a couple of accompaniers.
Hi, Matthew. Mike and I watched a documentary probably about a year ago. We were fascinated by this, the Birdmen. And they were several places around the world. I also thought once in the United States, illegally. But we watched it, and of course one of the films, one of the men did die. And it is amazing to watch this documentary. I don't know if it was Brian Gumbo, which I love, or 60 Minutes. However, we never forgot it. And then you come out with this book, okay? And I was just wondering, did you know, you must know about this documentary that was made, shown in the U.S. Did you work with any of those gentlemen that were in that documentary?
I'm not sure which
It was a very
documentary.
core group.
I think it's the one, it was on 60 Minutes.
Okay. 60 Minutes, that documentary, I didn't work with those guys specifically. The guy I think who you're referring to who died, his name is Shane McConkey, and he was just a genius as an athlete.
Right.
Among the sport he was best at was skiing. And he invented basically the modern skis that everybody uses. He came up with that design against all conventional wisdom. He was just a really bright guy, and he would ski off of cliffs and then open his wingsuit and disengage his skis and then fly. And that's how he was killed. He wasn't able to disengage one of his skis, and eventually he crashed. But these groups, I don't want to say they're cliques, but there are groups, different groups of guys. I crossed paths with some of the people who he knew, but I wasn't embedded with the guys in the 60 Minutes program. The guys I was embedded with were from all over. Mainly they were from the U.S., but some of them were from Italy or Australia and Norway, for example. The guys that you're talking about, most of them had a skiing background.
Right.
They were professional skiers of one kind or another.
If anybody could catch it, you'd love it. Just Google it. Fascinating. Thank you.
I just have to say that as brave as it sounds that it is to jump out of a plane, as a person who has a million stories in my head that start with once upon a time but never went anywhere, I think it's so wonderful that you have published a book. I just think it's so Your parents did good by you.
I'll have to say he did good for us.
Thank you everybody for coming. I really and thank you for all the really great questions. And I think this is the time where we turn it over to the catering, Jonathan.
Turn it over to the catering, and if everybody could, some of you sort of pick up chairs and sort of put them against the wall, and the books are available at the counter, and then if you line up on this side so that the book is up in the center.
Yeah.